Dan Newsom, Boston University, America 1964, a year in music, history, and culture. Dan?
All right, so good afternoon. I'm, as John said, I'm a student at BU right now in a DMA program in music education. Before that, I worked at Berklee College of Music in a number of capacities for about 13 years. Before that, I was a teacher in Los Angeles at a private school for about 8 or 9 years. And that's as far back as I'm going to go right now. But while I was at Berklee, I went there at first to be to deliver faculty development programs to the music ed department in things like technology. And one of the first things we did was try to get, this is in 2000, and one of the first things we did was to try to get faculty to understand the value of not even necessarily putting things online, but maybe even putting things on a computer and then projecting them. Because faculty at that time were coming into the classroom, let's say it's a 50-minute class, and they would spend between 5 and 10 minutes doing things like taking roll and writing notes on the board, which the students then had to copy down. And I thought, and I was trying to convince them, you can just type those out and then project them. We're not talking about any internet or anything like that. And then gradually we got them interested in using materials that were online, which are variously referred to as a distributed classroom or a flipped classroom or things like that. So fast forward to 2006, 2007, and I directed this project called the Pulse Music Method, which is an online repository of materials. It was to be used as a curriculum for a project that, sort of a community service side of Berklee called the City Music Program, which was offering free music instruction to underserved communities around the country. The Pulse project sort of met with an existential crisis about a year ago, and its fate is a little bit in limbo. But but I will show you, if we have time, a couple of resources from that project that I think are pretty cool in terms of placing stuff online that you can either use at, during your teaching in the classroom, or could be assets to use, for a strictly online presentation, online course. Now this particular project that I'm talking about today is a number of things. First of all, I took a course in distance education at BU this past winter semester. And it was very interesting because we looked at the history of distance education. And let's just define distance education as a scenario where the teacher is in a different place from the students. Okay, could be across the street, could be around the world, different places. So there's no real-time face-to-face interaction. And if you think about it, this goes all the way back to Pony Express and correspondence courses and things like that. So we come up, so in this course, our final project was to create a course proposal for a course that we would, could conceivably be taught. So I remember 1964. Not afraid to admit it. I was a 15-year-old kid in my 9th grade history class in February of '64 in Washington, D.C. And I overheard my fellow students talking about, well, a couple of them were saying, are you going to the concert tonight, the Beatles concert? And I had no idea what they were talking about, because I was a classically trained, and I loved classical music, even though I had some guilty pleasures on the pop side. But I had no idea that the Beatles were who they were and that they were performing that night, a couple miles from my house. And of course, I learned later. But that was my first exposure to the name, the Beatles, and the excitement, the palpable excitement that And then, so anyway, so I thought, well, let me do a synchronic, synchronic study of the year 1964, which of course is 50 years ago. And it turns out that a lot of stuff happened in 1964, musically, culturally, and politically. And I'm going to try to concentrate more on the musical stuff, but also touch on different cultural and political things, because this is stuff I didn't know, and I just started digging deeper and deeper and found out some pretty amazing things. So everybody know what synchronic versus diachronic history is? Synchronic is studying what's going on at one particular time, i.e. the year 1964, versus the usual historical study is a diachronic, where you like a biography of a person, and you start from when they were young and they age and they did so and so, and sort of like a chronology, a narrative. This is also an exercise in an interdisciplinary study. So I have no idea where this would be taught. I'm a music teacher, and most of the in-depth exercises and assignments that I envision for this course are musically related, although there's a lot of very interesting political and cultural stuff that certainly relates to music. But it's when you start just looking at the music of 1964, or music in any era, I think there are tendrils that go out into the culture and into politics, and all of a sudden you discover oh my God, this was happening at the same time this was happening, and I wonder who affected what. Was the music affecting some political choices? Were the political choices being responded to by musicians? It's also an example of very, very low-tech and free web design. So I am not a web designer, as you will, well, you'll see. That'll become blatantly apparent. And I only used one YouTube video in this whole website to explain how I don't know if anybody knows what iframes are. Well, this is all built in Google Sites, which of course is free. And there is a way to write your own HTML and insert that into, but it's not really clear. If you just take a chunk of code and dump it into a window, things don't just work like that. So an iframe is really a link to another website. And I don't know if you've heard of NoteFlight, the online music notation program. So in here, one of the things I just put in as a placeholder just to see if it would work is a NoteFlight instance. And with NoteFlight, you can change the notes. It's all interactive, and you can change the notes and you can play it back. And I only have one line, but you can have entire scores, each of which each part of which can be mapped to a pretty decent playback audio. So we'll get to some of that. The agenda is metadata, which is this presentation, and then a look through the site, and we'll look at a few weeks as an example of what went on in 1964 and how some resources might spark a discussion, maybe in here or in a classroom, something like that. All right, 1964 was huge. These are all icebergs. So this is the tip of the iceberg, the Johnson versus Goldwater presidential race. Many people now, many conservatives nowadays, are there any conservatives? Don't be ashamed. Many conservatives nowadays point to Goldwater's demise in this election as an impetus to rebuild a conservative party, or the Republican Party. And we're now experiencing the fruits of that rebuilding. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was the supposedly true incident that triggered LBJ's ability to go to Congress and get legal validation for the war in Vietnam. Up until then, we had just been sending, as we are now doing in Baghdad, we've been sending these advisors and to help the South Vietnamese army. The Gulf of Tonkin incident really was where we turned the corner from kind of trying to take a back seat and helping the South Vietnamese to full-scale troop acceleration. Civil rights bill was signed over the 4th of July, just after the 4th of July. And it's interesting to, when you start looking at the civil rights bill and then you start looking at what happened during Freedom Summer, you realize that the civil rights bill was important, but what was perhaps most important was the voting rights bill, which came the year later. And that was after a lot of real drama that happened during the presidential conventions, well, the Democratic one. And that set up a much more accessible system of voting in the summer of '65. The free speech movement happened or started in 1964 in the UC Berkeley campus, and I went to Cal as a freshman in 1967, and by that time the entire Sproul Plaza area, which was previously supposed to be off limits to students with political messages that they want to distribute and pamphlets and so forth, was now just chock full of all kinds of groups trying to spread their message. Let's see. In culture, we have just some isolated events. The Ford Mustang appeared. Marshall McLuhan, who had already written Gutenberg Galaxy, came out with Understanding Media. And I recommend anybody who's interested in technology to read that book, because it is an extraordinarily prescient book about how we think about technology. In fact, I don't know this, but I wonder sometimes if Steve Jobs, remember back in Mac OS 9 when you had extensions? Remember that? And sometimes the extensions would conflict and you had to keep restarting your computer to try to figure out. I'm just wondering if he took that term from this book, because that's what McLuhan argues about, is that all this technology we have, whether it's the wheel or the computer or the microphone, is just an extension of our bodies. Cardinals beat the Yankees in the World Series. And here's a little quote from Wikipedia about that series, where they mentioned that it was sort of a turning point in how baseball teams were built, because all of a sudden free agency came to be much more important. Well, it started with the Curt Flood incident. Curt Flood was a Cardinals player, and also National League started attracting more Black and Latino players, and of course that changed the game beyond description. Okay, again, these are icebergs. So we have the Beatles, which we'll get into more later. Dylan, the Beach Boys. I like to call this year when Brian Wilson entered his middle period, and that is he started trying to emulate as his kind of mental stability began to degrade. He started to emulate people like Phil Spector in the studio, and you can hear that especially with "Don't Worry Baby," which was his kind of homage to Spector after hearing the Ronettes on the radio. "I Get Around" has been mentioned as kind of a breakthrough piece because it starts out a cappella, and someone mentioned something about the fact that DJs were used to having rock and roll records have 15 or 20 seconds of some kind of a vamp so they could talk over it, right? Well, this starts right in with the chorus of the tune, which disrupted that whole practice. All right, the Beatles had 2 tours, a movie, which was number 9 on the list of top 10 grossing films in that year. No Oscars, of course, and 6 number 1 singles. Dylan sort of became the godfather of folk, and I chose that word because I don't know if you've ever seen an interview of Dylan around his early years, 62, 63, 64. He was a snotty little jerk, full of attitude and entitlement and all that kind of stuff, and so you sort of get the idea that he knew what he represented. And in '64, and we'll see some videos of this, he performed at Newport and played Mr. Tambourine Man for the first time, just himself on guitar and harmonica. The next year, of course, he performed with the Butterfield Blues Band and shocked everybody because he had succumbed to the evil, the evils of rock and roll. And sorry for the redundancy there. In Motown, the Supremes had 3 number 1 singles, which was that's a significant achievement in a year that was pretty much dominated by the Beatles and a few other British invasion groups. The Martha and the Vandellas released "Dancing in the Street," which was a huge civil rights anthem. Temptations released "My Girl," which is probably one of the more universally known R&B hits from the Motown factory. And then there was the James Brown performance on the Tammy Show, which brought to that had a number of effects. One, it was all these white people suddenly saw someone who had been doing this for 10 years. This act that James had with the capes and the knee drops and the extraordinary dancing, and they saw this on a television show for the first time. And there's so many interviews with rock stars later on who said, when I saw that, I just thought, that's what I got to do, or how can I follow that, or where is this guy from? But he'd been doing this for years. He started in Georgia in the mid-1950s with the little tiny, the Famous Flames and him on piano, and now he had this full-blown big band with the 3 Famous Flames, and it was just an amazing performance. Okay, technical stuff. Why Google Sites? One, it's free, which is always an advantage. Seamless embedding of YouTube content and other Google apps. Now, there are dangers, obviously, with embedding YouTube content because, like has been mentioned, we don't always know if it's going to be there. You can also download the YouTube content and then just post that yourself. What I've done on this site, just for expediency, is just point to the videos because, like I said, it's real easy to do in Google Sites. They're owned by the same company. So, and the easy-ish embedding of iframe content like Noteflight. Easy-ish meaning you literally have to erase, or you have to add 1 letter into the URL, and then you're good to go. Now, another reason that I did this in Google Sites is because at BU we are blessed with or cursed with, I don't know which is the right way to describe it, Blackboard. And I don't know, and I've taken a lot of classes at BU, I've talked to a lot of professors. I don't know one professor or student that likes Blackboard. Is there anybody here who uses Blackboard that just thinks it's the cat's meow? No, I thought so. Yeah. So, so one music ed professor in particular just said to hell with it because they have no control over it, and basically what they do is they create this content and then it's up to a maybe a proficient, maybe not 100% attentive, certainly not content experts. What they're experts in is building in this platform in Blackboard. They're making sure that the button for weekly announcements works and things like that. The course I took from on distance education was taught by the former chair of the Educational Technology Department, and he did not have the clearance to go in and edit his own Blackboard content. And so I was pointing out, typos or things like that to him. He said, I can't do it. It takes weeks. I have to submit a ticket, and then maybe it'll get fixed, maybe not. So Google Sites basically, allows a professor to sink or swim on his or her own terms, and it's really very easy. And even if you teach in a public school, there's the time you save by building some basic content in a website where there's all this hyperlinking going on, and which the students can then view at home or on their phones, I think it's a real advantage. But there is no face-to-face tech support. Google has no human beings working there except the two guys that own it and sort of make press appearances occasionally. But I don't think there are any actual human beings at Google. I think they're little androids, maybe. And so you can't ever talk to a support person. There is no face-to-face tech support. So you're pretty much, well, I was going to say you're on your own, but you're not on your own because you have, well, first of all, there's other disadvantages. There's no iOS support for Flash-based content. And if you want to embed an MP3 in a Google page, the MP3 players that they offer you are Flash-based, so they won't show up on an iPad or an iPhone. And it's unclear to me whether the comments function is adequate for distance education. There's a comments box on the bottom of the page, and I think if you log in as a different user besides myself, you can add a comment, but I'm not sure how they're, how you can organize those comments. So if you want to have, for example, you want to post a video and assign students to write comments, I'm not sure that without actually, pasting in the HTML for that function, I'm not sure that it would actually work. And this morning, I think it was Matt's presentation, you talked about Edmodo. So then I thought, well, of course, you just go to Edmodo for that. But for purposes of this presentation, I'm trying to keep everything in the Google, what is it, the ecosphere. Yeah, so there's no tech support, but you do have YouTube, which is now officially the Universal University of All Practical Knowledge. And it's pretty amazing what's on YouTube. And of course, there's a wide range of crap and misleading stuff and rants that you don't want to, you just want to get rid of. It took me 2 seconds, and I found a little video on how to embed an iframe into a Google page. Piece of cake. So, all right. So legal. John talked about copyright issues. When I was working at Berkeley, we had to. I insisted that we use music as authentic. We used actually original tracks, and we also re-recorded about 110 songs from the ground up. So we have a, here's just a partial list. So here's a list of the songs that we recorded. And these are all multi-track recordings. And now, so if you open one of these up, you get what are called stems. Now, this is a virtual mixer, and you have pan, mute, solo, and volume for all the stems. Now, these are, many of these recordings are like 78 tracks. So there was some, decision-making going into the fact that we had to break them down into stems, which means that this could be the drum part, which could probably be eight tracks, but is now one stem, and so forth. So we did about 100 songs like this. That is so we could demonstrate we could isolate a bass line and say, here's the bass line from, say, What's Going On, and show the notation, and maybe just the track, or maybe just the bass track with drums and congas or something like that. So we had full control over over access to the raw data. Now, the copyright issues were huge because, again, as John explained, colleges are not really, they don't warm to the idea of being a test case for a copyright lawsuit. So we were very deliberate in going about getting written agreements from all the license holders for, I think we ended up getting about 80 or 90 of these things. Some people were, some, like Jason Mraz, for example, said, sure, no problem, you can have it, and that was easy. People like Taylor Swift wouldn't even talk to us. And of course, Coldplay, we recorded that one with all the strings. I can't remember the name of it, but Coldplay said, no, we don't do that. Even though, we satisfy the three big requirements of fair use, but also the Teach Act, which is protected by a password. It's not for sale, and you can't download them. They're all embedded in a flash player, so you can't download them, unless, of course, you take an output and plug it into another recording device, which is not, that's something we're not liable for. But anyway, it can be done, but that might have led to the pulling of the plug later on, is because it is time-consuming. We got really good deals, $500 for 3 years to use a song. And even in the case of a song like, there was a Beyonce and Jay-Z song that had 15 songwriters because it was sampled, many times. And so your songwriting credit is Jay-Z and Beyonce, and then, all these obscure people you never even heard of because there was 2 seconds of some stylistics tune in there, or something like that. But it's a daunting process, but I believe that music students deserve to hear, if not the original music, then some form of the music that will reveal all the kinds of stuff that you don't hear just by listening to the stereo mix of something. And I'm convinced that someday, publishing companies will realize this, and not so much publishing companies, but the license holders, because they're not always the same thing. And publishing companies want you to believe that such and such, like you can only have 90 minutes, or you can only have 10 minutes of a film. That's not law. That's just the publishing companies trying to control the law. And there are books out there on fair use which are, very interesting once you read about what the law actually is and so on. Anyway, then there are also legal aspects of student information. And I don't know the names of, maybe somebody here knows the names of the two laws that control to what extent you can post student information, especially minors, online, things like email addresses and demographic information and so forth. So those are that's a consideration that you have to keep in mind if you're building your own website. And I'm going to go now to the website itself. All right, here is the home page. Like I said, this was done as a project for a distance learning course proposal. So I have things like goals and objectives, assignments, just really briefly. I believe in almost everybody on the planet can make music, and so I have two types of assignments for this course. One is a writing assignment, so you'll respond to a video or something in the lecture. And then the other is this music assignment here, in which I encourage them to either get together in groups or, play with their next door neighbor or something, but supervise or participate in a recorded performance of a song that appeared in 1964. And I have some lists of different songs, in addition to some of the ones that we focus on. Here's an example of, this is the page, this is the week, the unit on the blues. And there are some videos I talk about different forms of the blues, 8, 12, and 16 bar. Here's a YouTube video of Little Walter's Key to the Highway. And then Albert King's She Caught the Katy, which is a 16 bar blues. I don't know if you know this, but Can't Buy Me Love also is a 12 bar blues with a bridge. Actually, the chorus is not a 12 bar blues, but the verse is a 12 bar blues. So there's different ways the blues can appear in a piece of music. Either it can just be, you know, those 12 bars repeated over and over again, or the 12 bars can be part of a larger piece, like Blues of the Night has a 12 bar blues in it as a section of the song. These are screenshots from the pulse music method. And they show, you know, it gives you an idea of the kind of interactivity we had when we were introducing kids to the blues. Here's one about, you know, different forms of the blues. And then here's an assignment. Oh, this is a very interesting interview.
The real old blues don't call for no jumping. If you go to jumping, that ain't the blues.
Now, I don't know how many people know who Son House was, but he was one of the, you know, this was done in 1964, I believe, at the, no, 65, because the other person talking is Mike Bloomfield, who was the guitarist in the Paul Butterfield band that backed up Dylan. But I try to get the message across to the students that blues is both a formal, you know, it has formal characteristics, 12, 8, 16 bar lines, things like that. Reharmonized blues, modal blues, things like of those, you know, musical characteristics, but also blues as a culture. And blues, you know, you talk about the blues, and there are many, many different versions of what the blues is. And Son House, who is a Delta blues musician, and at this point, I think he must have been in his probably 60s or 70s, and he's talking with a young, you know, guitarist, young white guitarist, who also has his own idea of what the blues are.
They name it the blues, but it ain't the blues. The blues is just by itself. That's the blues. When you done got lonesome and worried, don't know what to do, thinking about your loved ones, people that you want to be nice to you. You've been nice to them, but they ain't, and you're deceived by them. Now you got the blues by them. You don't know what to do. You want to see them, wonder where they're at, wonder where they're going.
Nothing theoretical about that, right? That's just coming right from here, and from a man who's lived it, you know, for multiple decades.
Wonder why they see me. I trust them with everything I had. I done everything. I turned my heart to them with faith and belief in them. And then they get up and deceive me. Now you don't know whether to cut their throat or to cry again. That's the blues, B-L-U-S-C.
It's very strange, because I'm not born to blues, you know. It's not in my blood. It's not in my roots, in my family. Man, I'm Jewish, you know. I've been Jewish for years.
But this old time stuff.
Anyway, and then there are a bunch of links here for more in-depth, you know, knowledge of the blues. There's a video here of Smokestack Lightning doing I'm sorry, Howlin' Wolf doing Smokestack Lightning, which has just one change, one chord change for the whole tune. And then there's Muddy Waters doing I Got My Mojo Working, which is a 12-bar blues with a very different beat to it. Let me go to the, here's the Beatles page. Now, you know, I want to show this video. How many people have never seen video of their Washington, D.C. performance? Oh, okay. Well, This is an extraordinary piece of footage because what you'll see is, the hottest band in the world, even though this is their first performance in the United States. You can hear just from the level of the girls and boys screaming. And they come out and the amps are pointed that way, right? But Ringo's kit is pointed the other way because it was in the round. And so while George and Paul and John are all plugging in and getting in tune, poor Ringo has to figure out how to get his drums, how to turn the stage around, the drum riser. And just imagine this kind of a scene happening at a modern rock concert, like Katy Perry, for example. Today, when you go to a rock concert, everything from the security to the support, the onstage support. I once saw a concert where the drummer broke a head in the middle of a tune, and 2 seconds later there was a roadie out there who changed the snare while he was playing. So he had to get down underneath the snare drum and lift that off and then put another snare on there. Didn't miss a beat. Anyway, so watch this. This is really extraordinary.
And now from the Washington, D.C. Coliseum, the world's most exciting group, Capitol Recording Stars, the Beatles.
The amps are pointed this way. He's pointed that way.
In case you don't know who this is, that's Ringo Starr.
Pointing the wrong way. All right. So I would show this video and then show maybe another video of a more current rock show and compare the differences not only in equipment but just the presentation. This is so prehistoric, it seems, so let's go on to. All right, so this is the folk scene in 1964. Now, Bob Dylan wrote Mr. Tambourine Man for his Another Side of Bob Dylan album, but decided not to record it. So this is the summer of '64 when he plays the song, probably for one of the first times, and this is before, obviously, the Byrds recorded it and made a big hit out of it. In this video, I want you to watch, Pete Seeger introduces him. And one of the themes I have about 1964 was that it was this corner that we turned, culturally, musically, politically, because there were I discovered so many examples, and this is one of them, of the old, whatever the old order was. All of a sudden, we see these new glimpses of what the future is going to be. So in this video, you'll see Bob Dylan playing. Pete Seeger introduces him and then just goes over here and sits by the side of the stage. Now the next year, '65, was when Pete Seeger was running around backstage, supposedly with an axe, trying to chop the power lines so that Dylan couldn't continue his debacle of playing folk music with electric instruments. But right now, this is the old Pete Seeger. Example of, how much more time do I have? Because I know we got off. Oh, really? Okay. So Dylan's "Blowin' in the Wind" was something of an anthem for the civil rights, for the American folk music, folk movement. And so I have videos here of Peter, Paul, and Mary doing their sort of corporatized hit version of it on the Jack Benny Show. This is a fascinating video of the Bee Gees doing it in 19... Has anybody seen this video? No. It's really... I got to play just a little of this, because this is... The twins,
Back,
the
are you?
twins,
I'm
Maurice and
Have you been thinking about this new game we
Robin
have?
are 14.
Yes. Do you have any
And
new
then
ones?
Barry
Someone
must be, what, I
said
don't know,
Bruce, was
17
it?
or something
Yes,
like that.
Bruce, who happens to be
But here's
aiming the
just
camera
a
at me now, suggests that
sample.
we have
People, they can talk the man. How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? How many times must the cannonball fly before...
You can hear the compressor go chunk, you know, when the volume of the vocals come in. It's extraordinary. So these are all sort of glimpses. Now, Change Is Going to Come was, of course, Sam Cooke's response to Blowin' in the Wind, because he wanted the black civil rights movement to have an anthem that would serve in the same way. And unfortunately, Cooke was shot like a week before it was released. All right. Beach Boys, again, you know, sort of a turning point. Brian Wilson's last days as a live performer. All right, so this video tells you all you need to know about American politics in about 3 minutes.
The testimony before the Credentials Committee, the FDP had a lineup of very different people. They had Rita Schwerner, the widow of Mickey, who had been killed in Neshoba County. They had Martin Luther King. Everybody knew King.
The seating of the delegation from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party has political and moral significance far beyond the borders of Mississippi or the halls of this convention.
But the highlight of the testimony was that of Fannie Lou Hamer. The sharecropper who had been evicted from her plantation had come to symbolize the Mississippi movement.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, it was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen.
The president, Lyndon Johnson, he's not afraid of Martin Luther King's testimony. He's afraid of Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony. And so he decides that the country should not see her testify live.
Johnson is in the White House, and he convened an impromptu press conference.
We will return to this scene in Atlantic City, but now we switch to the White House and NBC's Robert Goralski.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
On this day, 9 months ago.
He did it knowing that they would break away, thinking he might announce who his choice of vice president was going to be. Instead, he gets up there and he announces, get this, he announces that it's 9 months to the day since Governor Connolly, who was there, was shot along with President Kennedy. So he announced a 9-month anniversary. Everybody's scratching their heads.
Thank you very much.
And then he leaves. And by that time, Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony was over. However, it backfired on Johnson because it became a story that she had been taken off television and in the news that night, and for days afterwards, they replayed her testimony.
All right, so my question would be to students. Here's a president who has already signed the Civil Rights Bill, which, you know, just pissed a lot of Southern politicians off, but because Johnson, who was what he was, which was this incredible political steamroller, got the bill through. And here's this president who is now deliberately taking away from the American public their right to see some extraordinary testimony by a woman, you know, who represents, you know, a big chunk of the American people. What do you think about that? Is that ethical? Is that part of democracy? Is that the way democracy should work? And then, so he, not only that, but they refused to seat the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party because he sends Humphrey down there to kind of put the kibosh on that. And this is the same president who the following summer enacts into law the voting rights bill, which makes all of this moot. You know, so it's an amazing little kind of in miniature the way American democracy works. So anyway, I think I'm out of time. Is there any are there any questions or comments?
All right. Well, David, thank you very much. That's fantastic.